Monstrums. The time is nigh. Stand ready! Lay waste to the malevolent, lest the night prevail. As the sentinel between the dark and light, I, Aprilis, herald the fall of this dusk.
IX Monstrum Nox is the 9th mainline entry in Falcom's action RPG series following Adol the Adventurer. The game is set in the city of Balduq, where a group of people with fantastic powers called the Monstrum roam the streets at night. And you can totally jump into the game right at this point in the series. That's what I did. You can follow without having played the previous games. The game starts in Balduq Prison, a massive complex filled with prisoners, monsters, and magic, and it's at the center of the mystery of Balduq City. It's a huge compound, and nobody knows exactly what's going down in it. Before long, Adol breaks himself out of prison and becomes cursed to be a monstrum himself. So we embark on a quest to team up with other monstrums, uncover the secrets of Balduq Prison, and help out the city's citizens along the way. Let's jump into how good this game is, starting with the story. I'm beginning to sense a pattern in Falcom's RPGs, because IX follows the same basic formula that Falcom used in the Trails series. Every chapter, because the game is chapter-based, you do a few side quests, which opens up the Grimwald Nox for you to fight a few waves of monsters in, which opens up a new part of the city where the main quest is. You then complete a dungeon, revealing some new information about Balduq, rinse, repeat for about 20 to 30 hours. For the first half of the game, each chapter also adds a new monstrum to your party and another helpful character to your bar, which kind of acts as the home base for each chapter. Unfortunately, this formula doesn't work as well for IX as it does for the Trails series. In Trails, each chapter is in a different part of the country, so the side quests that you have to do serve to help you learn about the region you're in. So it doesn't really matter that you're doing slice of life stuff because it's all in the pursuit of world building. But in Ys, you spend almost the entire game in Balduq City, so the side quests don't feel like they're building new parts of the world, they just feel like filler material because the different parts of the city aren't that different socially from each other. So you aren't learning that much from each side quest most of the time. Compounding this is that the side quests don't really escalate, so even 15 to 20 hours into the game, you'll be hitting a high-octane, exciting part of the story, and then you'll suddenly have to stop to get decorations for the town or something. So it feels like a bit of a pacing problem. And there's no way around this pacing problem, because although I call them side quests, they are not completely optional. You have to do some amount of them to open up the new parts of the city for the main quest, so you're gonna have to do at least half the side quests in the game. Unfortunately, even when we ignore the side quests, the story also has some pacing problems. You spend the first 6 of 9 chapters meeting other monstrum, so each chapter is devoted to adding one member to your party and generally helping them out with some task they have to do. These chapters largely act as exposition, which means that the story doesn't really get going until chapter 7, which is only a few from the end of the game. The very early chapters of the game do a good job of introducing the city and its mystery, but then it feels like we're still introducing mysteries for the first 6 chapters of the game, until suddenly we get to chapters 7 and 8 and the game is throwing answer after answer after answer at you. This does make the later chapters really exciting, but it feels like some of those big reveals could have been spread out better through the story, or maybe we could have cut some of chapters 4 through 6 and had a faster paced, but still just as interesting story. All this is to say that the basic content of the story is good, but it was told in a way that I didn't find engaging, at least for the first 15 to 20 hours, before it gets really good towards the end game, but this doesn't make up for the exposition beforehand. One thing that does help the story, though, is that I did really like most of the characters in the game. Because the party members join you one chapter at a time, some of them do get more development than others because you'll have some of the early ones for basically the entire game, while some of the later joining ones are only there for a few chapters. This made it pretty difficult to invest in some of the later joining characters, but I did really enjoy all of the early joining characters. White Cat in particular has a great friendship with Adol, and I really enjoy the banter between Hawk and literally every other character in the game. I did find Adol to be something of an awkward protagonist. He doesn't talk much in the game, but he is voice acted and you do occasionally make dialogue choices, though these choices don't have much of an effect on the narrative. With this in mind, I wonder what the point of this design was, because he's not silent enough for me to project myself onto, but since he doesn't talk very often and his choices don't matter, he feels very dull. I think I would have preferred if they either really leaned in on the silent protagonist thing, or made him a more fully fleshed out character with his own personality traits. One thing that really helps these characters stand out, though, is the presentation of the game. The character designs in this game really pop, including some really unique, nice-looking designs. I loved how White Cat and Doll looked, for example, and Crimson King and Hawk, while less unique, still look great. On the other hand, the design of the game world doesn't reach the same standard as the character work. You spend the vast majority of the game in Balduke City, and most areas of it just don't look visually distinct from each other. You'll spend most of your time in Balduke City jumping from rooftop to rooftop on really similar looking buildings, and nothing in the city really pops. Until you get towards the end game, a lot of the dungeons look really similar to each other too. You'll be seeing a lot of dark brown or gray stone environments. Falcom did do a good job of varying enemy types a lot though, which I appreciated. As far as presentation goes, I would say another weak point is the voice acting. What's there is good, but it's absent in the game so often that it's almost like they're teasing you with the good voice acting every 4 scenes or so. I get that there's budgetary reasons for this, but I can't help but hear the voice acting in cutscenes and wish that it was more present throughout the game. And then the last detail when it comes to presentation is the music, and this is a Falcom game, so the music's awesome. They have the whole album on Spotify, and you should totally check it out. So I was kind of lukewarm on story and presentation, but the gameplay is what really shines in Ys 9. It's an action RPG, so it has all the basics you would expect: leveling up, stats, buying new gear, and consumables. But in combat, you have a party of 3 monstrums that you can switch control of at any time with a single button press, and each character has a normal attack combo and 4 skill slots. So you can always switch between your guys with a button press and jump between them to make really long combos or use different skills in conjunction with each other. You also unlock new skills as you level up, so you'll have a ton of stuff to experiment with by late game when you have a bunch of party options, and each of those options has a bunch of unique skills that you can mix and match. You also have an evade button and a block button, and a well-timed press of either will slow down enemies and give you a window to rack up some big damage. Throughout each fight, you'll also build up another meter that you can spend to essentially activate a super mode, where your health regenerates and you do extra damage. This also gives you access to a unique, really powerful skill for each character. All of this combines for a really fast-paced combat system that never gets dull and provides more decision points as new monstrums join the party and you unlock new skills. In addition to handling side quests and dungeon crawling, you'll also spend a fair amount of time in the Grimwald Nox. In these sections, you enter a portal and fight waves of enemies while protecting a pillar that the enemies try to destroy. All of the monstrum are active in these fights, so they tend to get pretty hectic. These segments are fun at first, but there's too many of them in the game. You'll do more than 20 by the time the game is through, and they don't really get more interesting after the first. The format stays exactly the same, they just get longer and more enemies get added. But the problem with just adding more enemies is that enemy design is also a mixed bag. I played on normal mode, and I never had to change my approach to non-boss enemies, regardless of what they were. You can always just spam your skills, and they'll die just the same. Things do get a little more interesting when it comes to the game's bosses though, especially during the early game. They hit hard enough that you have to actually dodge their attacks, and some of them have some unique mechanics. My favorite was a giant centipede boss that you have to chase up a spiral staircase while dodging its attacks, which was totally unlike anything else in the game. Most of the bosses are fairly straightforward though, and once you have access to better gear and consumables, even bosses become mostly trivial. So you should definitely play on one of the harder difficulties if you don't want to cruise through the game, and if you actually want to have to engage with the game's mechanics. There is a little more to Ys 9's gameplay than just combat though. There's all sorts of collectibles in Balduke City, and the dungeons are loaded with puzzles and platforming. To get through these segments and to collect all the collectibles, you'll have to make use of each monstrum's power. And as you recruit more and more monstrums, you'll learn powers like climbing walls, gliding, and more. These traversal skills are a blast to use, and I really loved running around the city looking for treasure and other collectibles. Most of the puzzles that you'll find in dungeons are on the simple side, amounting to little more than finding hidden switches to open doors, but I think that's fine for this type of game. Even simple puzzles like this help break up the action and keep the gameplay fresh. The only part of the gameplay that I didn't like is that at the end of each chapter, there's a prison segment where you play as a character with no powers. It feels really bad to go from flying and double jumping and wall running to being a regular guy that just has a single jump and a dodge roll. So overall, Ys 9 fuses some neat characters and great gameplay with an inconsistent story and presentation. I enjoyed my time with the game, but the required side quests and slow pace make the 30 hours Ys 9 has to offer feel really padded. You could probably trim 5 to 10 hours of fat off this game and it would be better for it. That said, in spite of its pacing issues and encounter design that doesn't reach the quality of the combat mechanics, Ys 9 is a lot of fun. I wouldn't put it at the top of your list, but it's a great filler title if you're looking for a fun romp of an action RPG in between the heavy hitters on your backlog. I give it a B-. If you liked this content and want to see more videos like it, consider hitting the subscribe and like buttons below, and I also stream every Saturday at 10:30 CST at twitch.tv/badgerbarian. Right now I'm doing a randomized 3 houses run, so check that out if you're interested too, and have yourself an awesome week.